Hi guys, it's that history guy. Today, we're diving into one of history's most legendary last stands. Now, you've probably heard of the 300 Spartans, thanks to a certain movie involving a lot of slow-motion abs and dramatic shouting. But the real story? It's somehow even more incredible than Hollywood made it out to be. Today, we're talking about the Battle of Thermopylae, a three-day clash in 480 BC where a small Greek force held off the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. And spoiler alert, it didn't end well for the Greeks. But sometimes losing a battle can win you immortality. So grab your bronze shield, metaphorically please, they're heavy, and let's journey back to ancient Greece. Picture this, it's 480 BC, and Xerxes I of Persia is having what we might call empire envy. His father Darius had tried to conquer Greece and got embarrassed at a little place called Marathon. Xerxes, being a dutiful son with absolutely massive ambitions, decided to finish what daddy started. But this wasn't going to be some quick military expedition. Oh no. Xerxes assembled an army so large that ancient historians claimed it took 7 days and 7 nights just to cross the Hellespont. Now, those numbers were probably exaggerated. Ancient historians had a tendency to get a bit creative with their math, but even conservative modern estimates put his force at around 200,000 to 300,000 men. That's basically the entire population of a modern city, armed and marching toward Greece. The Greeks, meanwhile, were doing what Greeks did best, arguing among themselves. Some city-states wanted to fight, others wanted to hide, and a few were probably considering switching sides and hoping nobody would notice. It was Athens and Sparta who stepped up to coordinate the defense, which was like getting your two most competitive friends to work together on a group project. The Greek strategy was simple: find a narrow pass where the Persian numbers wouldn't matter and make them pay for every inch. Enter Thermopylae, literally hot gates in Greek, named after the natural hot springs in the area. It was perfect, a narrow coastal pass between the mountains and the sea, maybe 50 feet wide at its narrowest point. You could march the largest army in the world through there, but you'd have to do it basically single file. Leading the Greek forces was King Leonidas of Sparta, a man who probably looked at Mission Impossible scenarios and thought Tuesday. Leonidas was around 60 years old, practically ancient by warrior standards, but he was Spartan royalty, trained from childhood to fight and lead. These weren't the kind of kings who sat on thrones eating grapes. Spartan kings led from the front. Now, about those famous 300 Spartans. Yes, that number is historically accurate, but here's what the movie didn't tell you. They weren't alone. Leonidas brought about 7,000 other Greek allies, Thespians, Thebans, and soldiers from other city-states. But the 300 Spartans were the elite corps, the professional soldiers who'd been training for this moment their entire lives. Why only 300 from Sparta, you ask? Well, it was harvest time, and there was also a religious festival happening. The Spartan government basically told Leonidas, "You can take a small force now, or wait for the full army later." Leonidas, being Spartan, chose small force now because waiting was for people who didn't have abs you could wash clothes on. On the Persian side, we have Xerxes himself, a king who traveled with a throne, probably had someone to taste his food, and definitely had someone to hold his parasol. The ancient sources describe him as tall and handsome, though they might have been influenced by the fact that criticizing the Persian king's looks was a good way to become very short very quickly. When the Persians arrived at Thermopylae, Xerxes did what any reasonable person would do when facing a small Greek force. He waited for 4 days. He kept expecting the Greeks to see his massive army and run away screaming. Instead, the Spartans spent their time exercising, oiling their hair, and generally acting like they were at a spa rather than facing certain death. This apparently confused Xerxes greatly. A Persian scout reported that the Spartans were combing their hair and exercising. Xerxes asked a Greek exile what this meant, and got the cheerful reply, "Oh, that's just what Spartans do before they die fighting." Finally, Xerxes sent a messenger with an ultimatum: "Surrender your weapons." Leonidas gave the reply that's echoed through history: "Molon labe," come and take them. It's basically the ancient Greek equivalent of "make me." The battle began with Xerxes sending in his regular troops, Medes and other subject peoples, The Greeks, fighting in formation behind their bronze shields, cut them to pieces. The narrow pass meant the Persians couldn't use their numerical advantage, and they found themselves facing the most professional soldiers in the ancient world in the worst possible terrain. Day 2. Xerxes brought in his elite guard, the famous Immortals, 10,000 Persian warriors who were supposed to be unbeatable, and they got beaten, badly. The Greeks would pretend to retreat, the Persians would charge forward, thinking they'd won, and then the Greeks would turn around and demonstrate why this was a terrible idea. For 2 days, the cream of the Persian army threw themselves against 300 Spartans and their allies and got absolutely nowhere. Xerxes was reportedly so frustrated, he kept jumping up from his throne, though his parasol holder probably kept him properly shaded throughout his tantrum. Now, if this were a Hollywood movie, the Greeks would have held the pass forever through pure grit and impressive abs. But history had other plans, in the form of a local Greek named Ephialtes. Ephialtes knew about a mountain path that could bypass Thermopylae. He went to Xerxes and offered to show the Persians how to get behind the Greek position. His motive? Ancient sources suggest he wanted a reward, though some modern historians think he might have had political reasons. Either way, his name literally became synonymous with nightmare in Greek, which gives you an idea of how his neighbors felt about his career change. Leonidas had actually posted troops to guard this path, about 1,000 Phocians. But when they saw the Persian force coming through the mountains at dawn on the 3rd day, they retreated to higher ground instead of fighting. This meant the Persians could march right past them and come down behind the main Greek force. When Leonidas realized what was happening, he made a decision that cemented his legend. He dismissed most of his allies, telling them to go home and live to fight another day. But the 300 Spartans stayed, along with about 700 Thespians who refused to leave, and 400 Thebans. Why did Leonidas stay? Partly it was Spartan honor. The word retreat wasn't really in their vocabulary, but there was also strategy involved. Someone needed to delay the Persians long enough for the dismissed allies to escape and warn the rest of Greece. It was a sacrificial rearguard action, and everyone knew it. The final day at Thermopylae was less a battle than a massacre with style points. Surrounded and outnumbered, the remaining Greeks formed a tight circle and fought to the end. Ancient sources tell us they fought with spears until their spears broke, then with swords until their swords broke, then with their hands and teeth. Xerxes had ordered that Leonidas be taken alive, but the Spartans made sure that wasn't happening. They fought over the king's body multiple times, eventually carrying it to safety in the center of their formation. When the Persians finally overran the position, they found that every single Greek defender was dead. The Persians had won, but at enormous cost. Ancient sources, probably exaggerating again, claimed they lost 20,000 men over 3 days. Even if the real number was much lower, it was still a shocking price to pay for a narrow mountain pass. Xerxes, in a fit of rage, ordered that Leonidas's head be cut off and mounted on a stake. This was actually unusual for Persian kings, who typically treated fallen enemies with respect. But 3 days of being embarrassed by 300 Spartans had apparently gotten under his skin. Here's the thing about Thermopylae. The Greeks lost the battle, but they won something more valuable: time and morale. The 3-day delay allowed the Greek fleet to position itself, and, more importantly, it showed every Greek that the Persians could bleed. Word of the Spartan sacrifice spread throughout Greece faster than ancient Twitter. Suddenly, the massive Persian army didn't seem quite so invincible. If 300 Spartans could hold them off for 3 days, what could all of Greece do working together? The Greeks went on to win decisive victories at Salamis and Plataea, eventually driving the Persians out entirely. Xerxes, who had come to Greece as a world conqueror, limped home, having learned that sometimes the smallest obstacles are the hardest to overcome. A monument was later erected at Thermopylae with one of history's most famous epitaphs. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." It's poetry, but it's also a perfect summary of Spartan values: duty, obedience to law, and the willingness to die for their city-state. So why does Thermopylae still matter 2,500 years later? It's not just because of the incredible bravery, though that's certainly part of it. It's because Thermopylae represents something universal, the idea that principles matter more than odds, that sometimes you make a stand not because you can win, but because it's the right thing to do. The Battle of Thermopylae reminds us that numbers don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes 300 people with absolute conviction can change the course of history, even in defeat, especially in defeat. And hey, they gave us one of the coolest one-liners in history. Come and take them. Not bad for a Tuesday's work.